it starts before the season begins. I have this concept called the season before the season. And it's more important for marathoners because the marathon is just such a long, difficult race. Can you run fast and have that feel comfortable? You know, that's a little bit subjective, but that's the point. I want someone to be able to have a lot of different gears at faster paces. And that usually comes from training for middle distance races, you know, doing those hard workouts, running, you know, mile, 2 mile, 5K, 8K, 10K race distances. And then they become much more capable, have a foundation, not just of endurance, but a foundation of some speed as well. And turning that into a good marathon performance is kind of easy.
In a world of runners, Jason Fitzgerald becomes a renegade on episode 12 of the Runegade Podcast. Today, we have Jason Fitzgerald. That Jason Fitzgerald from Strength Running Podcast.
That one?
That one. Yeah. Wow. So Jason, we know him. We know him as a 239 marathoner. We know him as an avid podcaster and a columnist. And he really brings a balanced approach to training. And that's what I'm really excited about this episode, Mark. We've had some trail runners on. We've had some doctors on, some scientists. And we've had coaches, but I would say maybe they were more geared to like the ultra running coach. Jason, he's geared to all running distances, but he's really good for the 5K, the 10K, the half marathon, and the marathon. And he can really help bring out your personal best in those events. So that's what I'm really excited to explore with the coach today.
We all know I need some help with the PBs. And also learning all the other acronyms that go along.
Pabst
you
Blue
said something
Ribbons?
the other. Yeah, Pabst Blue Ribbons. No, only Athletic Brew. Only Athletic Brew, because when you're sitting down on your podcast with a running strength guru, there is an Athletic Brew for you. Blonde golden.
Excellent.
Tasty every time.
And I noticed today, Ronco, that you have a very nice plaid shirt on.
You know what? I have a library of flannel. Quite the collection. Because I just love Dixon flannels. They fit great. They look great. And there's also a nifty little sunglass cleaner in the bottom corner of the shirt. So when you get those little grimy glasses, you need a quick wipe. Use the corner of your shirt. Microfiber. I think of everything. I can even put my sunglasses in this little hole pocket there.
Well, look
Isn't
at
that awesome?
That is awesome.
Oh.
It's always the little things that make the big difference, right?
And speaking about that, Path Project shirt, again, gorgeous. And I believe that's the same one that you gifted me. I mean, not that exact one that you're wearing right now.
Yes, I took it back. I washed it and I'm wearing it. So
That's good. But I do love that one for running and hanging out, lounging, bird watching, everything. You can do everything in those shirts.
hey, if you want to look good on the road or the trails and then look good on the night out in the town or out shopping, Projects is your running apparel company. They make great product and it's performance based. Like we talked about it. Remember I made up that word, anti-odor. You know, it's got the anti-odor. It has odor resistant capability. And that's what's key because runners can stink a little bit, right?
Ain't that the truth?
And not just our running, we can actually stink. And not just our podcasting, that can stink too.
That's right, Tito?
Tito.
Oh, Tito. We'll have to get him on one of these weeks.
No, Tito, you're not coming on. We were so excited to have Jason on this episode that we just dove right into questions. And so we hit the ground running. So enjoy.
Jason, welcome.
Hey, fellas. How's it going?
Jason.
Good. How
Thank you so much.
All good. We tend to use the time to kind of get climatized and try and not get tongue-tied on things, which always inevitably happens too. So, and I know you're 350 episodes in, right? So, or there's probably some in the bank too, in the pipe coming as well, right? So, I find that I oftentimes trip over myself when I'm speaking. So just kind of, that's why we do about 10 minutes before we kind of like record the intro as well. That way we just kind of roll right into our conversation with the guests that we have.
Well, I'm excited. What are we talking about today?
That's a great question. That's what we've been exploring, right? So we got 11 episodes already out there, and we've had Dr. Mark Cucasella on, we had Golden Harper on, Liza Howard, Sabrina Little. And you know what? It was probably more focused on those ultra distances. And what we're really looking forward to is our audience, they're all training for a big fall race, whether that's a half marathon or a marathon. And we have you, the running coach, our first, I would say road-based running coach, although you coach all the distances. So maybe explore that. Like, how can you help folks set themselves up for success in the fall? Because we're all pretty good at setting ourselves up for failure in the fall if we just try to do it ourselves.
It's easy to fail as a runner, isn't it? The hard part is actually putting together a good season where you don't fail.
Absolutely. And then what is that? Like, what is a good season for new runners? So Mark is a new runner. I think Mark's been running for about a year. That's his story. Mark and I work together too. So we hang out lots. He's a new runner. I've been running for a few years. And there's a lot of thing about, we as runners, you think you know what you're doing. You know, you don't really know what you're doing. And Jason, you've probably seen it all. How many people have you seen who think they know what they're doing, and you're like just shaking your head when you're by yourself, like, I can't believe what they're doing.
I might have an unpopular opinion that most runners don't know what they're doing. So, yeah, I think a lot of runners need guidance, particularly if they don't come from a background of running cross country and track. So if they don't have that formal elementary experience in the sport, it's going to be really hard for them to think about cycling through seasons and how to structure an entire year of training. You know, it's not about, I'm going to train for the 800 meter or the mile middle distance events, because, you know, as adults, we rarely run those distances, right? But we tend to focus on the half marathon and the marathon distances. But if we don't have that early experience, how do you go from season to season? How do you create a season? You've never actually experienced a season, so it can be really hard to conceptualize it. So yeah, that might be a slightly unpopular opinion, but I'm going to own it.
I love it. I love it.
So, like, I know that you're a coach, and actually, what do you prefer to be called? Do you want to be called Jason, Jay, Fitz, Coach? What do you like to go by?
I mean, Fitz really brings me back to my college days, and I do prefer that. I mean, you guys can call me Jason, Fitz, whatever you feel comfortable with. That's fine with me.
Awesome. Well, Jason, so as Todd mentioned, very new to this. Fortunately, having Todd as kind of a running mentor, I've been able to avoid quite a few injuries over the last several months, because when I start speeding up and he sees on Strava what my results are, he's like, hey, whoa, gotta slow down and establish that base. So how early does somebody come to you for, coaching advice? I know that you have socials out there and podcasts where a lot of great information is shared, but when somebody is seeking a coach, like, when do they tend to approach you? Is it when they have maybe a major run coming up, or how do you establish that relationship and then start getting them on board with a training plan?
Yeah, so I think typically when a runner comes to me to start some kind of coaching relationship, it's either right after a failure or it is at the beginning of a season. That's probably 90% of the scenarios where someone's like, okay, I would like to run the New York City Marathon in November. So, maybe early summer, I'm going to reach out to a coach so that I'm going to be prepared for that race. Or you have the folks on the other side who ran the New York City Marathon. It didn't go very well. And then they reach out to a coach afterward to say, I didn't have this great experience. I thought I was training okay, but can you help me with my next big goal? And then, we'll start talking about when that is and, when a good time to start chatting is. But typically I like to tell runners sooner the better, because, if we're talking about how to have a good marathon season, it starts before the season begins. I have this concept called the season before the season. And it's more important for marathoners because the marathon is just such a long, difficult race. And another perhaps slightly unpopular opinion I have, I'm probably not making any friends in this podcast
That's
here,
okay.
is that beginners probably shouldn't be running marathons. The first year of your running life, can we focus on races that aren't so physiologically demanding that you don't even know if you're going to finish it?
Right.
It's like you've been running for 3 weeks and you want to go run a 50-mile ultra marathon. It's like, slow down, buddy. Let's come back a little bit and develop some fundamental skills first. Can you run fast and have that feel comfortable? That's a little bit subjective, but that's the point. I want someone to be able to have a lot of different gears at faster paces. And that usually comes from training for middle distance races, doing those hard workouts, running, mile, 2 mile, 5K, 8K, 10K race distances. And then they become much more capable. They have a foundation, not just of endurance, but a foundation of some speed as well. And turning that into a good marathon performance is kind of easy. So the season before the season idea is basically, let's make sure that what you're doing before your marathon season is going to set you up for success. Because there is no couch to marathon program that really exists. And any good coach worth their salt is going to say, you have to have a baseline level of fitness before you even start marathon training. If you have a 16-week marathon plan, your average long run at the beginning of that plan probably has to be 10 miles, maybe slightly more, so that the safety of the progression is sound. You can't go from running 4 miles as your long run to running about 20 miles as your long run in like 12 weeks. You're just going to get injured. Or if you don't get injured, you're just going to have a poor marathon experience. You aren't going to run as fast as you possibly could, or it's just going to be uncomfortable. And you might finish that race thinking to yourself, I never want to run another marathon again. So I don't want that experience for runners. I want runners to finish a marathon thinking, okay, that was really challenging, but I felt prepared. It felt good. And, I'm excited to fix a couple things next time around so that I can have a really good season next time.
So you must have a really kind way of telling the people that are using your coaching services of, I told you so, when they kind of go at it a little bit too fast. So what is your best way of just telling them, be like, okay, I guess you didn't stick to the plan? Or is it just a flat out, why would you go and do that? Like, you stick to the plan, you exceeded it, you went too fast. Like, how does that work from the coaching to student relationship?
Well, the good news is that I am so much less of a drill sergeant in my coaching practice than I might come across on a podcast or on social media.
Gotcha.
Because when you're actually working with a human, you have to be a little bit more sensitive to their emotional state, especially after a poor marathon where they're throwing their hands up in the air thinking that they just wasted the last 4 or 5 months of training time. Yeah. Usually I don't have to really say anything. They know, they're going to come to me and say, Jason, I know we talked about going out at XYZ pace and really holding yourself to that, but I didn't do it, as you could clearly tell from my splits, and I paid the price. And a lot of the times, look, learning things the hard way is often the only way that we'll learn. I have probably made every mistake myself in the book when it comes to running. And so it's all a learning process, and it's okay. I ran the Boston Marathon, and my second mile was my fastest mile of the race. Not how you should be doing it. And I paid the price later. And I'm the guy who knows how to approach a marathon. Like, I should not be making these sort of rookie mistakes, but hey, it's Boston. It's very exciting. And those downhills will come to get you. So yeah, you have to certainly be sensitive, but at the same time, I think being honest and direct is maybe a slight notch above kindness in my view when it comes to a coach-athlete relationship. I don't want to be so kind that I'm not telling you the truth, that I'm telling you that you can accomplish whatever goal you set your mind to, even if that's becoming an Olympian and you just ran a 6-hour marathon. Okay, I'm not that kind. I'm going to be honest and direct with you in a kind way.
Yeah. Well, do you see a difference too with the folks that are coming to seek your coaching advice? the difference between running a marathon and racing a marathon.
Yeah, there's a huge difference. I mean, almost anybody can run a marathon if you give yourself 5 or 6 months of preparation, but the distance is so challenging to master. And then also, if we step back and think about it from a physiological perspective, to gain the skills necessary to race a marathon, it takes years and years and years of training. And I don't mean years and years of training for a marathon. I mean just training for running, getting good at the half marathon, at the 5K, at all these distances, because each one is slightly different and requires a different skill set. Although at the end of the day, running is running. So if you spent a year getting your 5K time from 21 minutes to 19 minutes, you are going to PR your next marathon because you are a much better runner at this point in time. So better runners run better times. So I don't care if it's the mile, the 5K, the 8K, some weird offbeat distance, you found a 12K and you blew your old PR out of the water. Great. You are becoming a better runner. You will run a faster marathon provided you do the training necessary.
And I love what you're saying there, because I'm having this realization just over time that as a new runner starting off, I had no concept of running fast. What is fast running? And because I started later in life. But then you kind of get to a point where you're not really putting in the training and you're not really learning to develop that speed. You're kind of like just in this middle zone where you seem to get the same results over and over again. And then all of a sudden it's like, I got this great idea. I'm going to go run a marathon. And all I got to do is run this pace I'm running a little bit longer. And it just doesn't work. So for new runners and those runners who've never had a training plan before, or never had a coach, what's the benefit of learning to run fast? Like, what does that do to your running?
That's a really good question. I feel like I've been beating this drum for years because it's a concept that I think is so important and powerful, and it is so misunderstood and rarely applied with a lot of runners. So if you look at the best marathoners in the world, almost to an individual, they will have been a track athlete first. They will have focused on shorter middle distance events like the 1500 or the 3K or the 5K. I mean, everyone loves talking about Eliud Kipchoge as the marathoner. Well, I believe his 3,000 meter time is one of the top 10 ever, if I'm not mistaken. Please fact check me on that, but it's really, really good. And so building up your ability to run shorter distances much faster is a cheat code to running a good marathon. You know, I didn't have a good marathon when I first ran my first marathon. Very cliche, hit the wall at mile 20, but I ran 2:44. And a lot of folks were like, that was your first marathon. How did you do that? It's like, well, I'm a 4:33 miler. Like, did you really think I was going to run a 4-hour marathon? You know, like we come back to running fitness is running fitness. So more specifically, the shorter distances teach you how to recruit more muscle fibers. They teach you how to get really good at being comfortable with being uncomfortable. They teach you much better running economy. So, you know, there's no room to hide in a mile race. You cannot coast. You cannot settle. There is no ability to, you know, settle into a nice rhythm. No, it's very aggressive. It's very speed oriented. You need to learn how to compete and not just run your own race. And that's what I think a lot of half marathoners and marathoners focus on, is running their own race. Well, races are typically run against other people, not against yourself. It's not a time trial all the time. And running the shorter distances teaches you how to compete, how to actually practice the skill of racing, responding to another runner's move in a race if they're surging, learning how to run in a pack of runners when you're running, you know, your 2-mile race pace, which is a very fast, uncomfortable pace to be running. You know, it's very unsustainable by definition. You're running on borrowed time. And so you're sort of just hoping to get to the finish line before you kind of collapse. And that kind of mental toughness training, that kind of training and racing that really drives up your VO2 max is a cheat code. I mean, you're gonna get to your first marathon after 5 or 10 years of training, and your VO2 max is going to be through the roof. You're going to have very much more competitive equivalent performances in all these other races. And let's not forget that these other races are actually easier to run, even though we're talking about how fast they are and how hard they are. There's no time to settle. If you run a bad 5K this weekend, that's okay. You can run another 5K the next weekend and exact your vengeance on the distance, right?
That's right.
If you run a bad marathon this weekend, you can't run another good marathon the next weekend because it has completely beat up your body. It has put a stress on your endocrine system. You need to wait 6 months until you can race another good, fast marathon.
Wow.
It's just not true in the middle distances. You can race a mile, 800 meters, all those short distances much more regularly and recover much more quickly. So that means you can race more often. And if you're racing more often, you're practicing the skill of racing, you're giving yourself more at-bats, more opportunities to improve and get better. And that's like the hidden secret of why a lot of marathoners never get any better, because they're only running 2 marathons a year. You're only giving yourself 2 opportunities to improve. And the marathon is so difficult that if something can go wrong, it's almost like it will go wrong. Actually, that's not true. I've run 4 marathons. I've raced 3. I have only run 1 good marathon in my entire life. And, that can happen in the shorter distances, but it doesn't affect you so much psychologically. You can come back, you can do it again. It doesn't become a defining race. So, there's psychological benefits. There's skill benefits from learning how to race and pace yourself. And then there's also the physiological benefits of building up your speed, your power, your strength, your running economy, your VO2 max before you go and run a marathon, which requires a lot of aerobic fitness, which is the thing that takes the most amount of time to build. So if you've only been running for a year, your biggest limiting factor is your aerobic endurance. You've got to just run a lot for a long time and just do that ad nauseum. It's a little bit of a boring proposition, but it's really the only way to fully express your potential.
That advice is very similar to what Todd's given me as well. It's just kind of go out there, just really establish that base. So go ahead, Todd. I had a question there.
Well, it was along those lines what Mark was saying there too, is runners are terrible at really being truthful with themselves. You might think that you have a great aerobic base, but they really don't. So how can you intuitively tell, or how can you tell if you actually have an aerobic base? What are the telltale signs that you've actually got a good foundation, that you're ready to start layering on some workouts, some faster stuff?
Well, the bad news is that you never really know. It's not a binary issue. It's not like you either have it or you don't. It's more a question of how much of a base do you have? Because even someone who's never run a step has some foundation of aerobic fitness, whether it's genetic or whether it comes from, other activities that they participate in. Even things like, going for a walk and staying at a reasonable weight. All these things are going to help you, kind of have this baseline of general fitness. Now, the key, I think, for runners is to build as big of a base as possible. So, one way to look at that is through your weekly running mileage. I think, the science is pretty clear, as well as just the lived experience and day-to-day coaching experience of pretty much everyone, that, up to a certain point, the more you run, the better you're going to be. So one of the things that it was impressed upon me very early was you've got to try to get your running mileage up to what is considered competitive levels if you want to be a competitive runner. So I was always someone who wanted to be the best runner I could be. I ran probably 30-ish miles a week when I was in high school competing in cross country and track. My senior year, I started running a little bit more, trying to get into the 50s. And then as soon as I went to college, my coach was, okay, freshmen are going to run 70 miles a week. Now, I got injured trying to run 70 miles a week, but that's part of the game. And through some trial and error, you gradually build up your capabilities. And then I was comfortable running 70 miles a week. Then I was able to run 80 miles a week. And, I found for me personally, my physiological limit when it came to mileage was about 90 miles a week. I pretty much broke myself every time I tried to run more than that, no matter what I did. So I think through this process of trial and error, trying to get up to your highest mileage level possible is a good strategy to do. Now, it's a multi-year strategy. You have to be much more gradual when you're in that uncharted territory of high mileage levels that you haven't reached before. And then just keep in mind too, that high mileage, that term is relative. There's a lot of people who think 90 miles a week is low mileage and they're running 140 miles a week, or someone who can only run 50 miles a week. So it changes. It's a relative scale. If you are mileage limited because you might be injury prone, that's where some really good cross training can come into play. Cycling, pool running, the elliptical, things like that. They're a little bit more running specific. If you added on to your running training, again, not as a replacement, but as a supplement, an extra 2, 3, 4, 5 hours of, relatively easy aerobic conditioning, you're going to progress much more quickly. And, at all of these stages, you have an aerobic base, right? At no point can you say, you don't have a base. So, when I was a younger person, I used to think that, a certain mileage level and performance level was my peak. And then you just keep pushing the envelope. And then all of a sudden, your 8K race pace now becomes what your 5K race pace used to be. Mm-hmm. And it's just this evolution of, the more I train, the faster my times get. And at no point did I ever actually say, okay, I've reached the promised land. I have built my aerobic base. I can ride off into the sunset and all my training is going to be perfect from now on out. It's more like, well, can I be a little bit more consistent next time? Can I run slightly more? I took that week a little bit easier because my foot was hurting. What if my foot didn't hurt? I would have been able to run more. I should have been more consistent with cross training. I could have added another hour of cycling on, Sunday, Tuesday nights because of my schedule, but I was lazy. And, you run through all these scenarios of things that you could fix in your training next time. I think that's one of the most exciting parts of being a runner, right? Is just looking at your training and thinking about all the ways that you could improve things in the future. But the aerobic base is something that, bad news, it takes a while to build. Mm-hmm. The good news is that theoretically, there's really no limit. So you can continue to run high mileage. You can continue to run aerobic workouts like lactate threshold and slower, and do a lot of cross training, consistent long runs. Those are probably the 4 best things at building a good aerobic base. And you can just do that cyclically over the course of your entire running career. And every year your aerobic base gets a little bit stronger, a little bit bigger.
So then as a coach, perhaps you can provide a little bit of insight on this for us. So we're in the midst of training for something that's coming up in August. It's a beer mile. And I'm wondering, should I spend more time on the running portion or the beer portion to, maximize my, or I guess reduce my time?
That is a great question. So I have run a couple beer miles when I was a little bit younger. And do you remember the website hotornot.com?
Yeah.
Probably would be considered very toxic by today's standards.
Definitely.
But there used to be a picture of me shirtless in half tights after a beer mile in
we gotta find this picture.
Yeah. Mid-vomit, just projectile vomiting after a beer mile. On hotornot.com. I didn't get any dates from that, which is kind of odd, but that's neither here nor there. I think if you're training for a beer mile, it's a good question. I mean, I would try to get into good mile shape, be able to run the best mile that you can.
Okay.
And then just try to be quick with drinking the beer.
I know, just that
carbonation.
You got that
down pat, Mark.
Carbonation.
Yeah. Like I always struggled with keeping it down because you'd chug a beer in like 15 or 20 seconds. That was fast for me. I'm not a fast chugger, but
no, me neither.
Then I would try to like run, a 5-minute mile pace. And oh man, it is tough. Your stomach is sloshing around. I would just try to like not think about it and just It is a 4x400 meter workout with a 10, 15, 20 second break so that you can rehydrate. If you can handle the volume of liquid, you're going to be fine.
Okay.
You know what? I like what you just said there, because I was going to ask you this question. Help us get into mile shape. So if you're a half marathoner, you're a marathoner, get into mile shape, probably have no concept of it. So what kind of workout could a half marathon or marathoner do, early in their season, because it's going to be a fall marathon season, to get into mile shape? Like what would you recommend to put us in that category to run a really fast mile? Because I've never run a fast mile. Like Jay, I'm pretty slow.
It's exhilarating. I highly recommend it. I think when you're trying to run a fast mile, which is such a short race, especially if you're an adult and you're not like a 15-year-old track athlete asking the same question and dude, just go to track practice. Like that's the way. The one thing that I would recommend is build a foundation of speed. And we always talk about a foundation of endurance, but you can have a foundation of strength through years of lifting weights. You can also have a foundation of speed. And I found that a lot of adult runners don't run very fast, very regularly. And it becomes almost a coordination skill issue. And they're going to be limited by that. So I want to get you comfortable running almost as fast as you can. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean like, I want you comfortable almost sprinting for like a long time. Because that's, like I'm just going to run a fast 400 or 800. That would certainly help, your chances in the mile is getting good at even the shorter distances. So that old analogy of if you want to run a fast marathon, get fast at the 5K. Well, a miler who gets good at the 800 is going to then run a very good mile. But I would start with some strides. These are about 100-meter accelerations. You might want to start uphill. There's a little bit more of a strength stimulus and less of an injury risk because you're running uphill and there's less impact. But just running strides regularly, let's say 4 strides, maybe up to 6 twice a week, doing that for like a month before you really get into the season is going to be really critical if you don't already run strides, because strides are like the bridge between easy running and a workout. Okay. And I think with the mile, you want to get good at running just under and just over mile race pace. So your workouts are going to include, yes, obviously some work at your mile race pace. You might do a lot of, 200s or 300s at mile race pace, but you also want to be running faster than mile race pace. So, maybe some 100s or 200s that are much quicker than your actual race pace. And you also want to be running a little bit slower than mile race pace. So maybe 2 mile or 5K race pace. And that's where you can do some slightly longer repetitions. If you were doing thousands at your 5K race pace, that's a pretty good VO2 max oriented training session. And, these two support paces, as well as your actual mile race pace, is really going to build a lot of comfort with these higher end gears. Sort of like a beginner runner really only has 2 gears. There's hard and there's easy. And even the easy is kind of hard sometimes. If you're a new runner, running's always a little bit difficult. And the more experience you gain as a runner, the more gears you're going to have, especially in the what I'll call, sub-threshold pace ranges. Because I think your threshold is like your lactate threshold, your 1 hour race pace. A lot of runners do tempo runs or things like that are oriented around this effort. Very few runners actually go faster than this. And then they don't discover all of the gears around these very fast paces. So, can you do you have a 400-meter race pace, an 800-meter race pace, a 1,000-meter race or 1,000-meter race pace? And when you have different specific paces for all of these short races, you get really good at pacing, and you also get really good at knowing what you can run for some of these distances. You might know what you can do for a 5K and a half marathon, but as soon as you get more granular into, okay, I want to run 1,000 and a mile and a 3K and a 5K and an 8K, now it becomes a little bit more difficult to really figure out what your pace is going to be. And a lot of runners who don't have experience there will end up running almost the same pace for a lot of these middle distance races. It's because they don't have the gears. They don't understand, that an 800 is going to absolutely suck 200 meters in, and that's the point. And, they're like biding their time and kind of rationing energy in some of these short races. So I would definitely encourage 1 to 2 workouts a week. Still do a good long run. You still want to run 10 plus miles for a long run. The mile is still surprisingly a majority aerobic. So most of your energy is going to come from the aerobic system to power that effort. So maintain a good long run, but then keep your workouts pretty short and fast. And if you wanted to have a base phase of training beforehand, where you're doing a little bit more tempo runs and higher mileage and long runs, I think that's a great idea. Again, it kind of comes back to that idea of the aerobic base. It can always be built, and it's the gift that keeps on giving. So, just to summarize, I guess, is just get comfortable with a lot of those different really fast paces, because that's often the thing that adult runners lack. And I'm no different, right? Like I'm 40 years old, and I ran high school and collegiate track. And the older I get, the more I get away from that. And there's no way I could get on the track and even run workouts at the same effort that I used to. And it's almost one of those things where if you don't use it, you will lose it. So let's start doing it. Let's reclaim that skill, and let's get comfortable with those really fast paces.
Well, you mentioned something there too. So I turned 41 this year. Wow. And once a year, we have a group of people. We play in this softball tournament, right? And what I found over the last 2 years is the number of injuries. We're all, around the same age, and that, not everyone is, running all the time or doing any kind of prep and whatnot. And I actually am kind of concerned with myself here, in that I know that one day you're just running as hard as you can to first, second, third. And I don't want to ruin myself for the rest of, the summer by pulling a hammy or another kind of injury, right? So I'm thinking now I'm only a few weeks out, and I haven't done any kind of speed training for this day. So any kind of other recommendations in, like, a good warm up for the team to, try to make sure we can last more than 3 games without injuries. But we were so plagued last year that we had to borrow a player, and we started out pretty, with a deep bench. So anything to, for a 1-day kind of event where you're putting your body through a lot of wear and tear, you're accelerating faster than you will probably for the rest of the year. Similar kind of thing, just even shorter sprints, or what do you think would be good prep for that?
Yeah, this is a good question. Also a tale as old as time, right? A bunch of 40-year-old guys getting injured playing softball. Like,
oh, I know, it's terrible. But the stories we tell afterwards.
Yeah, like there's a 40-year-old that tears his hamstring every day thinking he can do what he did when he was 25.
Right.
So yeah, I was in a softball league when I was in like my best running shape ever.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very concerning to me. Like I could go to the track and do some really impressive things for me personally. And I knew I could run fast, but that softball league, man, I'll tell you, that Sunday morning softball league was out to get me every week. So number one, I would say, let's do some strength training.
Okay.
Stronger connective tissues and muscles are going to be more resilient to injury. Number two, start doing some of those strides that we talked about just to get yourself comfortable running pretty fast. You may want to shorten the stride, maybe not 100 meters, maybe 75. And instead of getting up to about mile race pace, you maybe flirt with a top end speed. Okay. So if you were to graph a stride, it would look like a bell curve. Your peak should be max effort or very close to it. But again, it's almost like you run a couple steps at that max effort and then you're already decelerating. Okay. So you're touching speed, you're playing with it, but this is not a workout. This is not supposed to leave you sore or fatigued in any way. It's just, can we get some experience with speed? Again, it's that bridge between easy running and hard running. Next thing I would do, and this is probably maybe the most important, is do a good warm-up on the day that you are playing softball. So this is like the problem here with 40-year-old guys like us when we go to the softball game, is that we don't warm up, and half the time we're drinking beers, we're having a good time. And next thing you know, you hit the ball and you basically have to go from couch to sprint as a 40-year-old with no warm-up.
Right.
In no universe is that ever a good idea. I wouldn't even advise high school runners to do something like that. The risk of injury is just so high. So try to do a good warm-up, like you were maybe getting ready for a race. Maybe a little bit less running. So you could do something like maybe you run for 5 or 10 minutes. You do a 10-minute dynamic flexibility routine. Even like a normal running warm-up. Like I have so many on the Strength Running website, like the standard warm-up, the Matic warm-up. You could just do this before your softball game. Then I might run a couple strides so that you're really loose. You've just practiced running pretty fast. Now you go play softball and you're going to feel warm. You're going to feel loose. You're going to feel more, athletically capable, and your injury risk is going to go down for something like that.
No, I really appreciate that, because I think running out to the fence and back just doesn't really, do it for you on game day there, right? And
well, Mark, we can give you some other advice too. Is hit the ball over the fence and you can walk around the bases.
I love it. Yeah, there you go.
A mush ball. These things are pretty
and
tough.
I liked how Mark was he's like legging out a single to first base. There might not be. You got to make contact with the ball first too. So maybe you need to get the batting cages first too and layer that in there.
I'm giving you a lot of credit that you're actually going to hit the ball, Mark. I haven't seen you play.
Yeah, I've got a lot of work to do in the next couple of weeks here. So
when we start talking about this, as we age, runners usually shy away from the faster stuff. What you taught, how we started the conversation, was that we never came from a collegiate or a high school background, cross country or track. And then they always worry about getting hurt. From your coaching experience, do you see more people getting hurt during the workouts or during those mid-distance, tempo runs or the long runs? If you had a Pareto, where people get hurt, are they getting hurt at the track doing intervals?
Well, I would say that it's not when runners get hurt that's the most important thing. So it's not like if a workout is too hard and that it presents an injury risk. Like, let's say you haven't been doing any workouts, Todd, and I have you go to the track and run 8 times 300 meters at your mile race pace. My God, that is a hard workout. You're probably, going to really struggle with that, but you probably won't hurt yourself then. It's in the week afterward where your body is trying to climb out of this physiological hole that you've put it in. You're dealing with stress hormones that are a little bit too high. You're dealing with extra fatigue that might be just, it's almost like a race effort rather than a workout effort. And you're also incurring all this trauma to your muscles, these micro tears that all these things have to recover. But typically we just continue on with our training plan, right? Oh, well, I got to run 6 miles today. And the next day is my long run. And then you get hurt. And then it's like, okay, you didn't allow enough recovery because you did something that was a little bit too aggressive. But I will say that the overall risk of injury is exponentially higher the faster you go. So the harder your workouts, the more dense your training is from an intensity perspective. So in other words, are you doing 3 really hard workouts a week? Well, your training is really dense. So it's not necessarily the speed of an individual workout. It's how many are you doing? What is the frequency of those workouts? And so when you understand that speed work and intensity is the real driver of running injuries, you could be a little bit more cautious with those workouts. I tend to be a little bit more conservative with workouts with runners. I tend to use a lot of aerobic workouts, like lactate threshold workouts, practicing, like half marathon or marathon race pace. We'll do a fair number of hill workouts. Hill workouts can be protective because you tend to not run as fast because you're running uphill and the impact forces are lower. Plus you gain a little bit of extra strength by running uphill. So I really like hill workouts. But of course, sometimes you just got to let it rip and really practice running fast. I tend to save that for when the athlete is ready for that and it's the appropriate time of the season. But then also, I might have runners doing, a simple 200 a set of 200s at their mile race pace pretty regularly. especially if they're training for the half marathon or shorter distances. Because again, I always want you to be running fast, whether it's by strides, whether it's, what Jack Daniels might call an R workout, a repetition workout, short reps, very fast, good amount of recovery. But the volume of it is so low that the injury risk is manageable. And if we can do that regularly, then you've never been too far from speed. And if you never shy away from speed work because you're just experiencing it regularly, it's going to be easier to do those hard workouts. So all that to say, I'm not sure like what specifically is leading to injuries, but I do know from the literature that intensity plays a huge role in running injuries. So I just tend to be more conservative with it.
Excellent.
And how do you then factor in or recommend, the cross training side of things? So how often should a new runner like me be hitting the gym and, focusing on whether it's just, legs, or am I doing much with the upper body? What would be a typical kind of recommendation for a new runner without giving away all your secrets? Because I know, we still want people to, go to you for coaching, right? So
yes, even though I sell strength training programs to runners, I will fully admit that there are no secrets. Okay. There are best practices. You could follow an elite training group, come here to Colorado and go hang out with Team Boss or something for a while. There are no secrets. I mean, they're doing all the things that you read about or hear in podcasts and things like that. They're just incredibly strategic and diligent with it. So they're doing it for 15 years straight, where most runners, well, maybe I could do it for 3 months and then I get bored or inconsistency happens. But from a strength training perspective, I don't think we need too much. Okay. If we're talking about weightlifting in a gym twice a week, I think is the gold standard. Any more than that, you're probably going to start sacrificing your running just because you're either too energetically drained or too sore to really focus on the running workouts or the long runs or even just the overall weekly mileage that is so important to your overall progress. So for lifting weights twice a week, somewhere, 30 minutes on the low end, 60 minutes on the high end, I think runners should focus on compound functional lifts, the major exercises, like squat, deadlift, press, for example. Those are classics. They never go out of style. Mm-hmm. They are fundamental for a reason. And the other days of the week, though, so if you're in the gym twice a week, you're primarily lifting relatively heavy. Your goals are strength and power. They're not endurance. So you're not going to do like 30 reps in 5 sets or something crazy like that. You're going to lift, 5 to 10 reps, relatively heavy. Maybe you throw in some power exercises because the goal is really strength and power. It's not endurance. Now, that's your gym work. The other days of the week, let's say you're running 7 days a week, which I know is a lot, but you get your 2 gym days. The other 5 days of the week, you should still be doing some kind of strength, core, or mobility work, but it's just not hard. It's sort of like the equivalent of an easy run where, twice a week you run a workout, but the other days you're still running, but it's very low intensity. It's easy. There's no expectations on your pace, things like that. So that would look like 2 days in the gym per week. And then the other days you might do a 10 or 15 minute body weight oriented, maybe you're using some exercise bands, strength or core workout, where the goals are a little bit more in line with what you might do in a physical therapy office. So most runners have been hurt. Most runners have seen a PT, unfortunately. A lot of the exercises that you do with a PT that might be a little bit more targeted, to the hips, to the glutes, to whatever, you might be struggling with. Most runners probably don't have to hear another physical therapist say that your glute med is probably weak and you need to work on it. We've been hearing this for years now, but it's probably true. And a lot of the easier body weight exercises where you're not even going to crack a sweat, you are not even going to be breathing hard for these efforts, but they really do a good job of one, just helping you cool down from a run. 2, building a little extra strength, but also just postural integrity, moving through wider ranges of motion that you don't get from running. So it can help with overall coordination and athleticism, helping you cool down afterwards. But then also good, improved running economy. You'll feel really good if you can get consistent with a comprehensive core routine and a good hip and glute oriented strength workout, doing that a couple times a week, in addition to your gym work. That's a little bit more strength and power focused rather than really targeting running specific muscles. But that's, I think, what would be the ideal strength program for most runners.
Well, you're sharing that. You mentioned there is no secrets, but this is maybe some of the Jason Fitzgerald strengths running wisdom out there, the experience, the coaching. So you're building up. We want to run our best fall marathon. Here's what I'm hearing of our listeners. I'm sure they're thinking about this. You know what? You should be touching some speed work, so getting comfortable with speed all the time. That's one thing I'm taking away. You probably should be spending a little bit of time in the gym doing some strength exercises, lifting for power. You probably should be working on your core a little bit. Always building your aerobic base. And you share that with lots of easy running, and we talked a little bit about that. Then we talked about these, like the workouts, how to get faster. And then the magic of those middle distance workouts and the long runs. So where do you see runners getting those two wrong? It's not the easy run, but it's not your long run. Where do they get that one wrong? And then where do they get their long runs? Like, what do you see that just makes you shake your head to say, you're running long, but that's not the purpose of the long run?
Yeah, those are good questions. Let me start with sort of those middle distance base runs, the easy runs. And let me make sure I'm getting this right. The correct question you asked me, is it, what are runners getting wrong with their base runs during the week? Or are these the aerobic workouts, like a tempo run or something like that?
The latter. Those are aerobic runs.
So I think with the aerobic runs, for the most part, I haven't seen a lot of runners get this wildly wrong, because I think this is sort of the easier part of training. Is if you've run a marathon, you know what your marathon pace is. If you run a half, you know what your half marathon pace is. So doing those workouts isn't terribly complex. A lot of the times those workouts are also kind of simple. It's a certain number of miles at that pace, or you can break it up into either time or mileage based segments, like 2 times 3 miles at your goal marathon pace, or something like, 2 times 15 minutes or 3 times 15 minutes at marathon pace. Where I see a lot of runners get things wrong is with the lactate threshold run. And number one, it's not doing more of it. Like, I think the threshold workout is probably one of the most important workouts for runners. It's the workout that most specifically increases the pace at which you can run aerobically. Okay. And that's the holy grail right there. How fast can you run before your physiology becomes unstable? So someone who can run a 5-minute mile pace and have that be aerobic, have that be not a VO2 max pace, this is the person who is going to run a 2:30 marathon or faster. So the threshold workout is not only very important, but it's one that a lot of runners don't get quite right. I would rather you be too slow than too fast on a tempo or lactate threshold run, because it's the difference between getting some of the benefit and getting none of the benefit. Because when you understand what is happening with this kind of a workout, it's much more physiological than, let's say, 4 times 200 meters at mile race pace. That's based on your race performances. It's not based on your heart rate, lactate levels. It's not based on your physiology. Threshold is very different. It is based on your physiology. It's about 85 to 90% of your maximum heart rate. And if you want to get super granular, it is a certain, range of lactate levels in your blood. Until we have immediate lactate testing, it's going to be virtually impossible to actually get this truly correct, but we can approximate. And I would just tell runners, when in doubt, be a little bit more conservative and go a little bit slower. Because once you are accumulating so much lactate that your body can't use it as fuel or can't clear it, that's almost by definition, that is almost by definition a VO2 max effort where you are running anaerobically. It is an inherently unsustainable effort, and you're not teaching your body to clear, process, and use that lactate as fuel. So you kind of defeat the purpose of the workout when you go too fast. So in terms of what they get wrong is just running it too hard. And for a lot of things, this is where like I'm like not the drill sergeant. I'm telling runners to go easy on easy runs. I'm telling runners to slow down their threshold runs. And they tend to get injured less frequently, but they also get better results because they're working in the appropriate range.
Interesting.
And then there's long runs.
Oh, yes. Go ahead.
I think the biggest mistake with long runs is not doing them consistently. Okay. I am someone who's pretty aggressive with long runs. I like to do a long run every weekend, even if we take a cutback long run, but I don't like to skip it because, like we said earlier, if you're a newer runner, under 5 years of experience, your biggest limitation is most likely your aerobic fitness. And the long run is one of the best runs to increase that aerobic fitness, as well as a whole host of other things. Like it improves your running economy because you run very tired and your body has to learn how to run more efficiently. It really helps with actually making you faster. When your slow twitch fibers fatigue, your type 2 fast twitch fibers pick up the slack. And so you're training these speed oriented fibers, at the very end of a long run, just by running your normal long run, easy effort. And you also get really good at fuel management, which is really important for marathoners. I would probably, besides just not doing them as regularly as I would like to see, I think the other thing is just treating every long run the same. This is going to be an easy long run. We've probably all heard LSD, long, slow distance. Right now, everyone's obsessed with zone 2 running. And you never want to, even touch zone 3. Zone 3 is the boogeyman of the zone system in a 5-zone model. So I like to implement, sometimes instead of a cutback long run, we'll cut it by a couple miles, but we'll include some quality in there. So this will almost be like a long run workout where, okay, you're used to running 16 to 18 miles. We're going to cut this one to 14 or 15 miles, but you're going to run 2, 3, 4, 5 miles at your goal marathon pace, for example. And that's a nice way to practice marathon pace, to practice, running when you're already tired during a long run. And it just kind of works on your fitness from a slightly different perspective. So not all long runs have to be the same, but we should be pretty consistent with them.
Excellent.
And just so I know too, as a newer runner, what should I be targeting for the long run? Is it more of a 20, I'll speak in kilometers, I guess, but like I don't know, like a 15 miler, 20 something kilometers? What should I be striving for because I'm only really doing 5Ks right now as a kind of a morning thing before I go into work. So just when I have the time on weekends, should I be looking for more of a 20K or is that too much at this point?
Well, your goal is a marathon this fall. Is that right?
No, that's just the beer mile. I'm not enrolled in any or signed up for any marathons, but for me, it's just, building that base overall. I'm not a really competitive person, so the whole race thing hasn't really appealed to me, but just continual development. Just want to improve my base and not, feel winded just climbing 4 flights of stairs. And the thing I used to always say too is just to control my muffin top as well is why I'm running. So all those things are factors in why I've taken up running.
And vanity reasons are legitimate reasons for running.
Exactly.
I sometimes will throw in, and it's okay to do some curls because vanity is okay too. Nothing wrong with that.
Then I can break out some short sleeve shirts, right? So until then,
I know I've got some work to do though. I think. Let me hit on what you said. You said continual development. Mm-hmm. I love that phrase. That is basically my coaching philosophy in a nutshell. Start where you are right now, but focus on continual development. So, what is your current long run distance right now? I mean, you said you're doing mostly 5Ks, but do you ever get out for a longer run? Because there is no magic number. Okay. So it's not 20K or 25K or 18K or 26K. Like there's no magic number. It's more, what can you be consistent with? And are we continually developing your aerobic system by gradually running a little bit more over time?
And I think that's it. So when I have ran a little bit longer, it's really been capped at about 10 or 12K. So I haven't tried going any further than that. Usually there's limitations due to, having to be somewhere with the kids or something like that, or I just don't give myself enough time to do so. But if I'm actually putting some intention forward to try running longer when I do have that time and actually set that time aside to do so, just trying to figure out what I need to target there. And is 10 too little? Should I just, go slow, but 15, something like that? Just curious.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you wanted to get into other race distances, there is a real good number to shoot for, which is sort of in the, I would say like 16 kilometer or 10 mile plus range.
Okay.
Because then it makes training for those longer races much more doable. So, we talked about the season before the season and how if you're training for a marathon, you really want to make sure that you're fit before you start. Mm-hmm. You sort of need to be ready to run about 16 kilometers at the beginning of a 16-week training cycle. Okay. And for the half marathon, you should be able to run 16 kilometers in training. And that will ensure that you can at least finish the half marathon distance of, about 21 kilometers. So I like to see runners get up to about that distance. And it does unlock a lot of other abilities too. When you can get really good at a long run, the workouts become a lot easier. You can imagine you want to run a fast 5K. Okay. I'm going to go do a workout of 6 by 800 meters at my goal 5K pace with a 200 meter jog recovery. Well, I'm going to have to revert to miles or my brain will break.
That's okay. No problem.
That's about a 3.5 mile workout, roughly. You are then going to have to do, ideally a 2 mile warm up. Now it's 5.5 miles. You probably need to cool down. Let's say you do a short cool down of a mile. Now you're at 6.5 miles. So to even do a 5K specific workout, you need to have the endurance that 6.5 miles is very easy. And that's currently about your long run distance. Mm-hmm. So I would say you might really struggle in that workout, not because you don't have the speed, but because you don't have the overall aerobic fitness to do that volume of work. Right. So even if you wanted to get good at the 5K, you've got to be able to do 5K specific workouts where the volume is 6-7 miles total. I remember in college, our workouts total, when you include all the recovery running and the warm up and the cool down, it was about 10 or 11 miles. So even for an 8K cross country race, I was running 15 or 16 miles as a long run so that the workouts were doable. And then of course you get all the aerobic development of doing those long runs. Gotcha. So yeah, I would get up to, very gradually. Maybe this weekend you run 12 kilometers because it's a distance you've run before. Somewhat recently, probably isn't going to be a huge struggle. Mm-hmm. Then I might say, can you do it 2 weeks in a row? Then you might try 14 kilometers. And then maybe you take a down week of only 10 or 12 kilometers. Then you do another 14 kilometer long run. The next week you do 15. And it's this very, gradual process of just adding a little bit, trying not to overreach. Don't think you have to increase every single week. You could do every 2 weeks, 1 or 2 kilometers. Just try to make it comfortable. Mm-hmm. But it's this idea of relentless consistency and overall continual development that happens over time.
Relentless consistency. I love that. When you think of the long run too, maybe this is for Uncle Mark or for myself or anybody. Let's say you're too aggressive and you're ramping up your mileage too much. And you get to your halfway point, your 3/4 way point, and now you're starting to slow down. You're starting to walk a little bit. Are you teaching yourself the wrong thing? Like you're teaching yourself to slow down when it gets hard, when it's better to teach yourself to push when it gets harder? Like, what are your thoughts on that? When you see people ramp up too much and they're just not ready for it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say that if you're having to actually slow down during a long run, you're either not ready for the distance or you're running an inappropriate pace.
Okay.
So, Mark, if you tried to run 16 kilometers this weekend, you're probably going to have this experience, right? You're going to get to 13, 14 kilometers and you're like, oh my God, I am just so done. And you got to slow down or walk.
Yeah.
So number one is just make sure that you are actually prepared for the thing that you are about to do. Because if you're actually prepared, you shouldn't ever have to abandon any kind of run because it's just too hard or difficult. Every run, save with the, a couple times a year where you try to, quote unquote, see God and do a brutal workout, everything should be kind of manageable. So make sure the distance is approachable. Make sure your pace is appropriate for the whole thing. I love to see runners negative split all their long runs. So the first mile or the first couple kilometers, you're just easing into it. You're warming up still. And then you can start running your normal easy run pace. It should be sustainable for the entire distance. But if you are feeling good, you're feeling a little frisky at the end of that run, and you want to pick it up at the end for the last 1, 2, 3 kilometers, I think that's just fine. So if you do have this need to slow down or walk during a long run, my hunch is that you probably shouldn't have been attempting the distance in the first place. So it's either a distance that's too long for you, or it might be a distance that seems reasonable, like, oh, it's only a mile or a kilometer longer than what I recently did, but you have been increasing at such a rate that your body hasn't had time to play catch up. It takes 3-ish weeks to fully adapt to an aerobic stimulus like a long run. So if you're doing an increase in mileage every week, you're not there yet. And then when you think about it from the perspective of your tendons and ligaments, the things that runners actually injure when they get hurt is almost always a tendon or a ligament, some connective tissue. It takes even longer for those tissues to adapt to the stress that you're putting them under. So these increases in distance and intensity should happen almost month to month rather than week to week. So, when I write someone a custom training plan, I often use what I call adaptation weeks. We'll repeat the same week of training twice. Let's make sure that you are comfortable here before taking the next step and trying to increase the difficulty of your total workload. So, but to get to your actual question, I do think it's sort of teaching the wrong lesson. We shouldn't be slowing down or stopping to walk out of necessity in a long run, unless we're an ultra runner and we're running 4 hours in the mountains. And of course we have to walk for some of that. That's a whole different ball game. But for most runners who are training for the marathon or the half marathon or really any of those relatively shorter races, let's try to get to the point where we don't have to do that, because I do think it's teaching the wrong lesson. And if the goal is to negative split most of our easy runs, including our long run, it should be a distance that's attainable. We should start slow, run, manageable paces in the middle, and that'll set you up to feel halfway decent at the end.
I love that. I love it. I'm with you. I know that's my goal this fall, Jason, is I'm pretty good at my training. I don't slow down during my long runs anymore, but I know on race day, I start to slow down when it gets tough. So I got to teach myself. And it's not because I'm hurt or anything else than that. Just getting more comfortable with being uncomfortable and to push through those harder points. And I love what you're talking about, because for new runners, it's about patience. Most people will run a great 5K, they catch the bug, and next thing you know, I signed up for a marathon next month. Can I write a 4-week training plan, or where can I find a 4-week training plan to go run a marathon? And then it turns out to be a crap show. And then maybe years wasted of battling through injury. But if one can actually build slower, they're going to have more successful race day, and they'll race rather than maybe run. So I love that. I love that. And now, Jay,
there is one more thing I would love to add, if I may.
Sure.
Is a lot of slightly newer runners might struggle with long run progressions, gradually increasing the distance of their long run, because they don't have a base of endurance first. And this is kind of a tricky concept to understand, because it's like, you sort of need to be able to exercise for, if you're going to do a long run and it's getting kind of long, we're probably talking 2 hours, somewhere around there, hour and a half, 2 hours, 2.5 hours. You need to have the physiology where your heart rate is going to be stable, or as stable as it, kind of physiologically can be. Of course, there's going to be some cardiac drift as you get slightly dehydrated, etc. But for the most part, your physiology should be stable during a long run, unless you're doing a workout near the end. And to be able to do that, yes, it requires this gradual building of the long run distance, but it also requires this foundation of aerobic fitness that you get from easy mileage and easy cross training. So if you can get on the bike and keep your heart rate in zone 2 for 2 hours, you're probably someone who will transition to being pretty good at long runs. Whereas if you don't have much exercise experience and you're winded after 45 minutes and you feel like your heart rate just climbs and climbs and climbs, even if you keep the effort the same, you need a tremendous volume of that very easy aerobic work before you can start going into those longer distance long runs. Because a lot of times your physiology becomes unstable because of distance in a very similar way that it will because of pace. And, with pace, it's like, okay, you're running your tempo runs too fast. You're going to slow down. With the long run physiology, it's like, oh, you just don't have the aerobic fitness. Let's build some mitochondria. Let's make sure that your heart rate can stay elevated in zone 2 for an hour, hour and a half. And that's going to make it a lot easier.
That's awesome. So many nuggets, so much wisdom being passed over. So I just want to, I know we're getting close to the end here. So I just wanted to thank you for your time that you spent with us today, and just give you an opportunity too. What do you have ahead of you for the next couple of months? What are you looking forward to this year? Are there any races coming up? Are there neat events that you're participating in or holding yourself? What do you have ahead for the 2024?
Yeah, I guess for me personally, I'm excited to sort of get back into somewhat good shape. I sort of retired from competitive running a little bit in 2015, but I'm getting the itch again. And even though I have been running and doing workouts and long runs and strength workouts, there just hasn't been a lot of that progression. But I'm starting to get into better shape now, and I'm reminding myself of how good it feels to be in better shape. And I love it. I love it. So I'm very excited for that, especially here in Colorado. I'm going to be able to get out into the mountains and do some absolutely beautiful trail running out there. So I'm really excited for that. And then later this month, I'm actually excited for, I'm doing a panel on recovery hosted by Fleet Feet on Memorial Day. The Boulder 10K is on Memorial Day, and it's like Christmas here in Colorado for all running nerds. So runners descend upon Boulder, Colorado, and there's just this big tradition of this huge race that sort of takes over the town. There's also this tradition of running the race, and then you do it again. You do another loop of the race, except you're like jogging it and you're stopping to talk to people and you're drinking beer and you're just having a great time. I'm not going to be able to participate in that, but I'm going to be at Fleet Feet in Boulder doing a recovery panel. I'm going to be doing another event with them, I think sometime in June, sort of like a Ask the Coach sort of event, kind of like this, except, anyone can show up and ask me all of their weird and wacky running questions. So those are the things I'm looking forward to the most right now. With strength running specifically, I am coaching a lot of runners right now who are gearing up for some of their races. So I get very excited over my clients' results and how well they're doing in the sport, because I just remember how good it feels to run a personal best. And I think that's the thing that got me addicted to the sport, right? That continual development, right? That constant improvement, getting better. It's like a machine. You put work in one side and you get a PR out the other. And I just love that. So I get super excited for them, especially when they've struggled and, they feel like they haven't, I'm never going to run another personal best, or I'm never going to figure out the marathon, or one of those scenarios. Mm-hmm. And it gives me so much joy to, work with those kinds of runners. So I'm excited. My personal running, got some cool events coming up. My clients are doing great. And, the podcast and video channel are going strong, which is also two things I'm very passionate about. I think podcasting has become one of my favorite things to do. And I get to talk to some really cool people like you guys. This is fantastic.
When listeners pull back this episode, they're going to be able to knit together at least a more salient view of how to train properly. And our advice is always going to be, if you really want to go race, find a coach, find somebody that can help you. And I know they can find you at strengthrunning.com. Where else can they find you?
Yeah, I think strengthrunning.com is definitely my home base, but check out the Strength Running Podcast wherever you find your podcasts. We are everywhere. And if you're more of a visual learner, you can check out the Strength Running YouTube channel. I think it's just like youtube.com/strengthrunning. And we try to publish a video every week about, certain topics that come across my desk as a coach. And I'll answer one runner, but then I'm like, this would make a good video. Let me answer this for the broader running community too. So I also like showing off how beautiful Colorado is in my videos sometimes. So I do like a little bit of running porn added in there too.
And Jason, we thank you. Thank you for your time. This has been awesome. This is a great episode. And there's so many takeaways and wisdom that Mark said. So we appreciate you coming on here and talking to our audience. And we'll link all those great areas they can find you in our show notes. So thank you, Jason.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. This was great.